Hello, welcome back to another session of CybHER Conversations. I'm Kanti. I'm the director for the CybHER Institute, and today I have with me Bella Maxwell, a CybHER leader, and I have our very special guest, Mea Clift. Mea Clift is an IT management professional. She has over 20 years of computer systems engineering, security management, cybersecurity management, and project management experience with a world-class customer experiences. She has a thorough knowledge of security control frameworks, risk management frameworks, and auditing procedures. She is currently the head of cybersecurity at Woodard Curran. She has worked with Booz Allen Hamilton and ASM Research in the past. Mea also holds incredibly difficult certifications like the CISP and the CISM and the CISA. Mea, thank you so much for being here with us today. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm so happy to be here talking to the next generation of cyber women. So thank you for this. So again, as we were talking about, my name is Mea Clift, and I've been in cybersecurity for, well, security, IT, and cybersecurity for 25 years. And I started playing around with computers when I was in middle school, and worked my way through and started an internship when I graduated high school. And that really fed my career forward in the space, and to now where I get to lead an entire company's cyber posture, which is really exciting and very intriguing on some days. I get to run the gamut. Some days my day might be full of meetings, just talking about what's going on in the business and what cyber can do to help, to discussing really big risks in our space. I'm really excited that I work in an organization that is supporting water and wastewater efforts around the country. So we actually get to not only protect our environment, but the country's environment from a water perspective, which is really fun. So some days it's talking about how we're protecting our clients with their water, how we are protecting ourselves and our data. And other days it's looking at our vendors and understanding what their risks are to us. Yeah, every component of the world has cybersecurity engaged in it now. And I'm sure as you go through your day as an individual, you notice these things like random emails that you get, or sharing things with friends on social media, even doing your homework has a cyber component to it. And I think it's incredible when you think about all the different aspects of the world that now connect thanks to IT and how we have to protect those. I think along the dates when I started doing cybersecurity and when I started doing IT support, it was very different. We didn't see cybersecurity in the same way. We didn't see the need for the protections that we have now, but with our world becoming so interconnected, with having so many things that connect to the internet and that affect our personalities, even in the space, it's just imperative for all of us to be diligent and to know what our risks are in the space. So I get to talk about that all the time, and it's super fun. And one of the things I really love is getting to educate people on cybersecurity. Everyone comes to the table with a different level of cyber knowledge. Some people, I'm sure you know people in your circles or in your families who may not understand why you shouldn't click on a link or see an email and go, this is a great deal, and it's really not. It gets them to somebody calling them and asking to do technical support on their computers. And being the person who gets to say, you want to kind of educate yourself in that space, or here's a concern that's coming. We get to do that both professionally and personally. And I get to do that in my training role. We have required training that everybody has to do. So being an educator is part of my job, as well as understanding how the technology works. So I get to be a technologist, and I get to play around with new technologies and see if they work or they don't work. I get to write. So I loved writing when I was in school. I loved writing essays. And I know probably everybody who's listening who is currently in an English class is rolling their eyes going, oh, I hate this. I will tell you that I can still remember how to write an 8th grade essay, and I use that to write a lot of the stuff that I write to present to my leadership on a regular basis. I also really enjoyed my history classes, and learning from history and seeing how far we've come really helps me to tell some good stories when I'm presenting a concern or presenting why something can be a concern in the long term. So all of these different aspects of my education have really driven my cybersecurity background and drove me to the career that I have now. I'm able to tell good stories because I had good teachers who taught me good stories. I'm able to see bigger pictures because of knowing bigger stories about history, or understanding how things interplay, even in science, learning chemistry and how to mix things, and that's important now, looking at water and understanding how some of our wastewater is treated, and how we protect that is really valuable to me too. I think the thing that I was most challenged by in my career, and still is math. I was never really great at math, so my struggle has been learning how to learn the financial component of my business. So if you like math, you will love making business cases and financial pieces. If you're in music, I share a kindred spirit with you. I was in band, and I sang. I still sing, and one of the biggest things that I learned in band is everybody is an individual, but we have to work together. We have to be one band, one sound. And that's the biggest takeaway that I think a lot of cyber leaders get when we start to see the whole picture of how cyber interplays with the world and interplays in our business. We all have to work together. We can't be a silo. We can't stand apart from the whole sound of the business. And so I encourage everybody to enjoy their music. And if you're playing an instrument, what way to go. And if you're French horn, I think you're extra special. Or an obist. My sister's an obist, and now she works for Microsoft. So music can lead you to an amazing tech career as well. So my day to day is really varied. Like I said earlier, currently, like today's schedule was meeting with our chief strategy officer to talk about how cyber is going to play into our future strategy and business. I was talking to vendors this morning and evaluating their reports, looking at their audits to see what gaps they may have that may be concerning to our business. And that just may be like they may not have had a backup report, or they may be missing doing training for their staff. And how does that impact me? How does that impact our business? And is it a concern that would keep us from continuing business with them? It's very related to health and safety as well. Like, you wouldn't go into a hospital that left everybody not use masks, or left everybody not use surgical gloves to work on patients, and went patient to patient to patient. I'm also going to not like an organization that doesn't take cybersecurity seriously, especially if they're holding our data. And as we know, data is one of our most precious resources in cybersecurity now. It's not about ransomware taking away the money. It's what are they taking while they're holding you ransom. I've also been talking about ransomware a lot, and a lot about data and data privacy, and understanding what we consider exceedingly private data or confidential data, and how long we should keep that data. And depending on who you talk to, it could be 5 minutes, it could be 5 years, it could be 20 years. It depends on the goal of that individual and the goal of the organization. So understanding that different places have different goals and different cybersecurity challenges is also really good to understand. And that's one of the things that I've gained in my career, is working through such a variety of positions. I've been able to see different companies have different tolerances for what they are comfortable with in regards to where their data is and how they protect it. Other things that I do is engage with our technical team to make sure that when they're doing implementations of solutions, or when we have solutions in place, that we're monitoring them effectively, that incidents are being documented, as well as writing policy. policy and governance, risk and compliance is really where I do a lot of my work. So policy, of course, is writing and saying, this is what we're going to do. And then procedure is, this is how we're going to meet that policy. So the policy is the how, and procedures, or policy is the why, and procedure is the how. And so I say, all of the company, we have to adhere to password protections. And then we write a procedure on how we're going to meet that. Again, we have a lot of policies that need to be created and expanded upon, and we need to review them on an annual basis because technology is constantly changing and we have to adapt. On top of that, we have to prove that we're actually following the policies and the procedures that we have in place. So that's where the compliance comes in. So we have a control framework that gives us questions, and we answer those questions and say, yes, we do this thing. And then we prove it with evidence, either screenshots or emails or other pieces of testing or reports that will show that we're actually doing the thing that we say we're doing to protect our data, to protect our clients, to protect our employees. Once we finish that, then we can get a compliance certificate from an organization like SOC, which is financial audits, ISO, which is mostly manufacturing and international business, or if we were in the federal space, an authority to operate. So it's mitigation and compliance working together to buy down the risk and also show that we are taking cybersecurity seriously. So that's my job in a nutshell. It's a very busy job. I don't think that there's any aspect of the business that I haven't touched and talked to about cybersecurity, some more than others because of the impact of the data that they're carrying. But I love it because I get to see every single aspect of the business. I get to help every aspect of the business. And at the end of the day, I'm helping to protect water and wastewater as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you for sharing that. I was going through your LinkedIn profile as you were talking, and I came up with a bunch more questions for you as you were talking.
Mhm.
So one of the first questions that comes to my mind is that you know, over the years you've held many different roles. You were working as customers engineering, IT website managers, escalation engineers. So you see a lot of engineering job titles in your profile. So what was the one pivot point that caused you to think, oh, you know what, I would love to learn more about cyber, I would love to be more involved in it? Was there any like a moment that like said, aha, this is where I want to be?
That's a really interesting question. And I'm not sure that I have a moment where I was like, cyber's where I want to be. My moment was more of a career pivot. So when I was a cloud security engineer, I was getting to a point where I would either need to go into architecture and designing networks and designing how we were going to put together these infrastructure environments, or I would need to go into management. And the company that I was employed with at the time did not have space in their management stack for another manager. And architecture wasn't really what was making me happy. I couldn't see a way through using all of the skills that I had gained to build these structures. So I started looking, and I ended up applying for this job as vulnerability engineer, which is how I got hired with ASM Research. And the first day I went in and they said, no, you're going to be doing GRC work. And I was like, what's GRC? And it ended up being the best thing that could have happened to my career, because I was able to use all of my knowledge and all of my experience, both as an engineer, but as a customer service person, and as a person who's always had to explain what it is I do or why something didn't work effectively. And we had challenges in the environment that I worked in. Is the engineers didn't understand why this documentation was important, or even what the documentation was asking. So I was able to take that information and translate it and work with the engineers to be successful in getting the documentation filled out, understanding how policy played into all of it. And I think, you know, as I think back on my full career history and even my experiences in the early days of the internet, which makes me sound very old, but I guess I'm really not that old, or maybe I am, I don't know. It's fascinating that different aspects of what I did in those positions and understanding how different things worked leads me to where I am now. For example, when I worked for Data Prize back in 2009, the ConfigHER virus came out. And I was thinking about how we spent an entire week remediating ConfigHER. And that was not just incident management, it was incident response, it was vulnerability remediation, it was patch management. So cyber really runs in my veins all the way through my career. When I look back at everything that I've done, even in desktop support, understanding that sometimes people do things, or even like Y2K and the importance of that vulnerability patch remediation, even though, we look at that now and we laugh. At the time, that was a huge risk to the organization and was a huge cybersecurity concern, if you think about it in that term. So it's an interesting way of, looking back, in hindsight being 2020. I think cybersecurity has always been part of my blood. It's just now it has a name, and I have more pieces to the puzzle.
Makes sense. Cyber, again, it's not a straight path into cyber. Like, there are so many ways you can come into the cyber workforce. So
Absolutely.
that's one way of showing that yes, there are many ways into cyber.
Exactly.
During when you were speaking, you mentioned, privacy. So I was thinking about so a few years ago, we did a podcast with Dr. Kalukian, the privacy by design. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on privacy by design, right? Because it's, for me, as a regular person, I would think that, my data, the restrictions or the settings that I can place on my data would be to be private by default, but it's not. So what are your thoughts on privacy by design?
I think that we've had this intense transition. We were very private people for a very long time. We all kept to ourselves. We had our little neighborhoods and our small communities that we socialized with. And that was really the extent of the world for us as individuals. Today, thanks to the internet and everything that's brought, for better or for worse, we now have more of a public presence than ever before. That's to our benefit and to our detriment. And I think we have a overly optimistic view of our world. I think we always have. As humans, we want to see the best in everything. And I think sometimes that has gotten us a little delayed in making these decisions effectively. So we look at, for example, the MP3 epidemic. And I say that as an epidemic because, we went through this whole phase back in the late 90s where you could download any MP3 from an FTP site and they were all free and we all did it, even though we only had dial-up, or, in my case, I had access to a T1 at work. And so I used a lot of that. The office let us use it for whatever, so we downloaded tons of MP3s. And so the later things that started to happen were things like, Metallica standing up and saying, hey, don't use Napster. Napster's bad. It's stealing money from our vendors. And a lot of people were very much like, oh, you can't take away my free music. And then over time, we see what happens is now we buy music, or now even we use Spotify, and Spotify, has Plays or Pandora or any of the other public music systems that we have access to. But now we have adjusted and paid for music, and we've transitioned into that space. I think privacy is the same way. We had things like AOL chat rooms where we thought we were anonymous, but we really weren't. We had these organizations where we could just share data and we thought it was totally fine to say whatever we wanted. And we've learned that that's not the case because it stays around for a really long time. And so I think privacy was kind of missing in a lot of that, and we're just catching up. So I agree that privacy by design needs to be implemented, and I'm a big proponent of it now because we are transitioning to a space where we're now seeing how much of our data is out there, how much of it is accessible. And there are things that maybe we don't want to have shared, or we shouldn't want to have shared. And we're seeing the challenges of not putting those privacy controls in place with things like AI generation, seeing what has happened with AI art, for example, where some AI art was found to have x-rays from a doctor's office in it. And that is very scary. Why were there no privacy controls built into that? Or why was there no control keeping that data from being accessible? Or were there and they weren't sufficient? So I think we have to look at privacy by design as something to aspire to, and something that we will get to, just like we did with MP3s and paying for them.
Awesome opinion. I see that you have the CISM, CISA, and the CISSP certifications. And I was wondering if you could walk us through the process of obtaining these certifications. What resources did you use to prepare for them?
So I'll start with the CISSP because that was the first one that I got out of those three. So it is probably one of the hardest tests I've ever taken, not just because of the way that they ask the questions, but because you have to change your mindset, especially if you're an engineer going into the exam, because you're not an engineer in the exam. You're not fixing the problem. You're evaluating the problem and presenting it to management or leadership. So that was a big challenge. I actually failed the test twice before passing it my third time. I will say that the books that are out there are great. I used the main book from ISC2 on it. I had the Sean Harris book, which is the McGraw-Hill Gold book on the CISSP. It's like I think they call it the all-in-one book. And I also used a lot of different testing materials, but I think one of the best things that I used was the CybHER CISSP course that's done by Kelly Handerhan. She not only puts things into a decent perspective and understanding sometimes when you read things, you're like, why is this important? And she puts the why to it, but she also has like 10 tips that she tells you to write down and memorize before you take the exam. And those were invaluable to helping me understand how to pass. I think the testing, you have the vocabulary mobile test that you can take from ISC2. And I did that like every night. I would just play with that. So that's getting the vocabulary. Then there's the BOSIN practice exam. That was teaching me how the test worked and how the test would think. And then the practice from Sean Harris was so difficult that I knew I would pass if I got like a 70% on the Sean Harris stuff. And that's because his questions are harder than the actual test, but they're planned out in the same way. So they really make you strive to think and work forward on that. So that was what I did for that test. The CISA, I used their practice question book. Again, that test was a little bit easier for me because of my experience as an engineer. A lot of that is how do you assess these different components, and understanding how a network works, or understanding how backups work, or understanding the importance of contingency plans is really important when you're looking at that exam. And then for CISM, I used the McGraw-Hill all-in-one book as well as resources from my SACA.
Very nice. And I've heard the SSP is one of the really difficult exams out there ever.
It really is.
Congratulations on obtaining the certification.
Well, thank you so much. I was very happy when I passed. I felt like I had the flu afterwards, and then I woke up at like 2 that morning. I was like, oh my God, I passed. And all the adrenaline like popped in at really, really early in the morning. So excellent.
Very nice. So, in cybersecurity, we see a lack of some, or now we're seeing initiatives out there that are working towards, getting more diversity, getting more inclusion. So how do you see the industry evolving in terms of diversity and inclusion?
I think that's an excellent question. And I'm happy to say I am seeing more efforts to be more inclusive and diverse. It's a slow process. I mean, for most of my career, I've been the only woman on cybersecurity teams and IT teams. And that has been a challenge, not only professionally, but personally. You know, I think back to the movie or the musical South Pacific, and it's anything you can do, I can do better. And that's been the mentality that I've taken. But sometimes that gets you in trouble, because while that may be true, you have to still play in the same sandbox with these individuals who may not see that. And so sometimes it's a matter of persevering or having good management that sees your value, or sometimes it means moving on to a different environment that's more conducive and successful for you. I think it's a lot easier now than it was 25 years ago as a woman in the space. But I'm also very encouraged by organizations like CybHER, WeSys. I'm part of Cyversity, which is all about empowering diversity and inclusion in cybersecurity. And I mentor for them and help people figure out how to get their first career, or even to move forward in their existing career in cybersecurity, which is wonderful. We saw increases in women at RSA conference, and while it was maybe 500-600 women out of 40,000 attendees, it was still only like 250 last year. And I'm seeing more meetups. I'm seeing more organizations focused on bringing these diverse groups forward. So I'm happy to be a part of telling that story, and I'm happy to be the shoulders of the next generation of cyber professionals, both women and people of color and LGBTQIA and all the other smaller communities that need to have their voice heard can stand on.
That's awesome that it's becoming more diverse and you're seeing an increase of women. So what do you think are the most important qualities of a successful cybersecurity professional? And how do you think young girls can develop these qualities?
I think some of the biggest things to understand personally is to be able to see in shades of gray. And I will freely admit that there have been times in my career when I've had very black and white thinking. And the reality is, and just like I said earlier, there's no absolutes in the world. And so black and white thinking doesn't really get you far. I use the analogy in my business now of trees in the forest. So if a tree is dead, it doesn't sway in the wind. And that's how you know if you have trees in your backyard that you need to take one down before it takes out your house. And trees that are alive and healthy are moving in the same direction and working together to, fight, to go with the wind, not against it. And so I want to be one of those trees that flexes. I don't want to be that rigid tree that could take out a whole bunch of things and be very impactful in a negative way. So I tend to look at things with a lens of more optimism than most. So also perseverance and tenacity. You're going to hear the word no a lot. You're going to hear the word you can't, or you're going to hear we can't, or we, I don't like the word can't. I've tried to take it out of my own vocabulary. I try to say I'm unable to, or I don't have the capacity, or I don't understand. And it's okay to say those things, especially I don't know. I think we've built this society that we're supposed to have all of the answers. And the reality is we won't have all of the answers because we aren't all seeing, all knowing. We can just do the best that we can with the knowledge we have and continue to research. Have a passion for researching, even if it's falling down rabbit holes for fun. I mean, I everything in my hobby list started with I wonder how this is done. And then I jumped in with both feet and I found my passions external to cybersecurity. And they end up feeding my cybersecurity as well, because it keeps me thinking, it keeps me researching, it keeps my brain active in what's new, what's up and coming, what's changing, what's important, what's scary out there, what is the importance of this thing that happened, or how can I use this story to help my business or help my personal life, you know? So I think those are main skills. But also, you know, when you're looking at what you're doing in school, find the things that you love and then say, how can I apply this? And this is something that I ask all my mentees when they're looking to transition careers, or when they're looking at cybersecurity and they don't really know where they want to go because it's such a huge field. First question I ask is, what do you enjoy about your current job? And that will help guide their career into a direction that keeps them happy and keeps them driven. Because you don't want to be a person who doesn't like writing, who's writing policy all day. Or you don't want to be a coder if you don't know how to read programming. And I freely admit, I my coding experience is JavaScript and BASIC, which is very old. So I leave that to the professionals. But that's kind of the thing, is find those things that you love and see how they can apply to your career.
That's so many of the points you just said, they are not just applicable in cybersecurity, but also, you know, in life when you are going forward in your career with other relationships, whatever you have, right? You have to be adaptable. You have to be of the mindset that you can be flexible, right? Don't be too rigid. And then the one you said where you can say, I don't know, I think that needs more saying, right? People are mostly very hesitant to say, I don't know, because they, you know, it's not just their fault, it's the way society is. If you say you don't know about something, they're just going to assume that, you know, you're not qualified or you're not talented enough. So I think that mindset kind of needs to change. And we need to be more accepting of people when they say, I don't know. But, you know, you could follow it up with saying, but I'll find out.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just saying I don't know and shutting them down, which I think sometimes happens. It's much more of a, oh, I don't know, let me dig into that and see what we can come to, because it shows that you're willing to adapt to what they're requesting. And it also shows that you have a willingness to learn and develop as well. And who knows, it may not work out for what you're doing, but you may learn something in the process that'll lead you down a whole other rabbit hole or a whole other adventure.
Awesome. I love that attitude, and like just willing to like research stuff and look into stuff is so awesome. So what is one risk that you took in your career that paid off?
Oh, I don't know. This is I don't know. Let me think about this for a second. I think that taking on a whole bunch of engineers when things were changing on my contract with ASM was one of the biggest risks. You know, I could have just stayed doing the work that I was doing, but I ended up taking on these field engineers who had never done GRC work. We ended up training them for a few weeks to get them ramped up. And one of the things that I find to be probably one of my career highlights was that out of 50 of them, about 20 of them are now cyber GRC professionals, and they're really excelling in their careers. And I can say I helped make that happen. And so it's a risk because you don't know if your commitment to them is going to really, really succeed. And knowing that these folks are doing amazing things where they are now just makes me really, really happy.
It's very cool. We're almost at the end of our session now, so I want to close the session with one last question for you.
Okay.
What advice do you have for the young people that are watching this video?
Don't give up. Even if things seem at their darkest, even if you think that you can't do it or that you don't have the talent, I'm telling you that you do. I'm telling you that you matter, and I'm telling you that you will persevere. And that is the biggest thing that I can tell anyone. If you're told you can't do something, or if your brain is telling you you can't do something, think about why that is, and then think about what you can do, and think about how you can work around that can't and make it a yes and a yeah and I can.
I love that. It's such a great motto, right? Don't give up. You got this. You can do this. So fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mea, for being here with us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day. So thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
you.
And thank you. Thank you so much.